amongst us. So for the outline of presentation, we'll be going through the introduction, the fiscal sector, the monetary sector, the physical and human capital sector, the economic growth and employment sector. Then we conclude with some recommendations. I know the budget is big, but we have taken these 4 sectors which we think we should discuss more on that. So as a way of introduction, as we've been told, a week ago, the Minister for Finance presented the budget to the Parliament of Ghana. And now, after years of tightening fiscal and monetary policies, beginning 2023, we have seen that this budget is trying to losing things to make sure that the tight fiscal and the tight monetary that we embarked on since 2023, we are now losing it. And so you see this budget is focusing on job creation, economic growth, and transformation. So as CPS, we've done our independent assessment and believe that this forum will spark meaningful conversations to support a more transparent and accountable public finance discourse. So on the fiscal sector, I don't know if we can show the graphs because the audience have to follow. All right, because I've already begun. Okay, here we go. So let's start our analysis. On the fiscal sector, we've seen large consolidation which has happened over the period. And I gave you the history that since 2023, Ghana has been experiencing fiscal consolidation. What is that? Keeping the gap between revenue and expenditure closer and closer and closer, and thereby reducing your public debt burden. And so, as you can see from the graph, we've seen a reduction of the fiscal deficit as a percent of GDP from 5.7% in the first 9 months of the year 2024 to 1.5% in the year 2025, the first 9 months, the first 3 quarters. So on commitment basis and on cash basis, you know that Ghana today report our expenditure and our primary balance and also our fiscal deficits in commitment basis and cash basis. So even today, if you trace the history back, you will not get those recordings in commitment basis unless you calculate it. But that has been the practice now by the IMF and Ghana. So we have seen a drop in the fiscal deficit. In the next slide, we are looking at the performance of Ghana's revenue in the first 9 months, so the first half and then the last quarter, and the total will be the first 9 months of the government of Ghana. We've seen a shortfall. We've seen a shortfall by 0.5% of GDP because the target was 11.6% of GDP, and the projections for the year ending 2025 will mean that we'll get about 11.5% of GDP. Even the first 9 months, we are seeing a deviation, negative deviation. Look at the last column, negative deviation of 4.7%. So we set a target and we are missing the target by 4.7%. On the next graph, we are projecting the reduction in expenditures, the budgeted versus the actual expenditures outturn or projected to end the year 2025. You look at the first 9 months of the year 2025, the blue is for the budgeted, and then the orange color is for the actual for the first 9 months. We are seeing a reduction in almost all the expenditure items, notably interest payments and the capex, the capital expenditure. In fact, the capital expenditure has been squeezed, and we are expecting a 26.9% reduction or less of the capital expenditure. It was projected at 32.66 billion, but we may end the year with 23.86 billion, and that is about 8 billion shortfall. In the next graph, we are projecting the fiscal deficit in the year 2025 ending. Now, if you compare the 2024 actuals in the blue line versus the 2025 revised figures versus 2025 projection, you know, the revised figures were presented to us during the mid-year budget, but it's been projected that there will be some deviations. You see that the government has stayed focused on fiscal, achieving a minimal fiscal deficit. So that in spite of the reduction, the possible reduction or missing the targets in revenue, the government is also trying to miss the targets in expenditure so that they will keep the fiscal deficit smaller and smaller and smaller. So as a percent of GDP, we are seeing 7.9% by the close of 2024 on commitment basis being reduced to 2.8% in the 2025 revised target and then 1.8% in the 2025 projections. This full year. On cash basis, we are seeing a similar trend where the fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP was 5.2% in the year ending 2024, falling to 3.8% in the year 2025, budgeted, and then the perceived actual in the 2025 will be 2.8%. So, as I indicated, the government is saying that, well, we didn't get our revenue, we're not going to overspend. We will still cut our expenditure. And this is the first time you've seen a government cut the nominal expenditure in the year 2025. It's so unusual, but to reduce the nominal figure is so unusual, but they did it in this year, 2025. In our figure 4 and figure 5, we are projecting the fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP, comparing 2025 projections and 2026 budgeted. So this brings us to the point that I made earlier, that the government is now loosening things. The government is now embarking on what we call expansionary fiscal and monetary policies. So you see, by loosening things, we expect the budget deficit as a percentage of GDP in the year 2026 to be a little bit higher than the 2025, both on commitment basis and on cash basis. On commitment basis, we expect it to rise from 1.8 to 2.2, and on cash basis, we expect it to rise from 2.8 to 4.0% of GDP. The graph on the right-hand side is projecting total revenue and grants versus total expenditure as a percentage of GDP. So the blue for 2025 projections and then the orange for 2026 projections. Again, look at both the revenue, the commitment, cash, and then the commitment expenditure and cash expenditure. You see an expansion, okay, an expansion of both sides, revenue and expenditure. So again, the point is that for next year, 2026 budget, the government is thinking of expanding the fiscal policies and the monetary policies. Let's look at the projected 2025 projected versus 2026 projected revenue, total revenue and grants. We are seeing an upward adjustment, in fact, in all the next graph, in all the, we are seeing upward adjustment in all the revenue measures, with taxes on incomes, taxes on domestic revenue, and goods and services, international trade, ESLA proceeds. We are expecting an increment in all these revenue measures or revenue sources in the year 2026 to be higher than that of 2025. In our next figure, again, similarly, the projected expenditure is supposed to be higher, or is expected to be higher than that of 2025, buttressing the point of expansion. So compensation is expected to be higher than the 2025 figure. Interest payment is expected to rise. Grants to other government units expected to rise. Arrears clearance, capital expenditure. We are seeing, if you compare 2025 projections and 2026, for expenditure items, 3 expenditure items, capital expenditure, goods and services allocation, and that of the arrears payments, they are going to be more than double. Going to be more than double their figure for 2025 projections. So the implications of what I've shown you, the graph I've shown you, is that we are seeing a substantial increase in goods and services capital expenditure and then arrears clearance, and these expansions in CapEx, especially in goods and services, if realized, would help expand the economy and grow, boost economic activities, and create the jobs that we all crave. But in increasing expenditure, efficiency is of the essence. It's one thing increasing the quantity, it's another thing being prudent with the expenditure. It's also projected in the year 2026 that financing will be done largely domestically. Since 2022, January, Ghana government has not been able to go to the Eurobond markets to borrow. So financing has usually been done domestically. And the government is thinking of issuing a long-term bond instead of treasury bill. So all the proposed capital projects will be financed by long-term domestic bonds. But there's some risk in terms of course, coming from the debt exchange. People took haircuts, so you are going to the same people to come and buy your bonds. There's a risk. There's a risk to interest rates. So people may accept to buy your bonds, but at a higher rate. You have to convince them. There's also the risk about uncertainties about government's ability to raise revenue, because we'll be missing the targets. The ideal deviation is between -3 and +6. But the history tells us that only 3 years have we achieved that with the deviation, 2015, 2018, and 2021, that we are falling within the ideal deviation of -3 +6. This year we are doing -4.7. So we've gotten out of the ideal deviation for revenue and grants. So there's still some risk as to government's ability to raise revenue to meet these, especially when the government has abolished taxes and is banking its hopes on compliance and using digital space to raise revenue. So the prudent management of this risk is required, to minimize government's funding costs and safeguard macroeconomic stability. Let's shift the gear to the monetary sector. Here we're touching on a few items like policy rates, exchange rate, inflation, credit, and so on and so forth. Again, remember the point I made earlier that 2026 budget is about expansionary, right? And so we kept things tight from 2023 when we went on to the IMF program. 2024, things were tight. And in fact, in the first half of the year 2025, things had still been tight. It is now that the BOG is loosening things and reducing the policy rates. Last time they reduced the policy rate by 650 basis points from 28% to 21.5%. This is expected to lower cost of credit and improve liquidity conditions and support business recovery and job creation. The monetary policy rate, in the year 2026 is expected to fall below 15%, somewhere around 10 and 15%. And the government will also expected to do little in the open market operation, because here you are loosening things. It's unlike before where you were keeping things tight and the government was frequently going to the OMO market or the open market. Now when you are loosening things, you do little of the OMO. And the exchange rate is expected to stabilize and have a perfect external balance, and the financial sector is expected to improve. This fiscal discipline should be restored through careful expenditure control, enhanced domestic revenue mobilization, and targeted social interventions. I'm sure the next topic will be of interest to many of us: intervention or intermediation. Let me give you the history. Ghana practices a managed flexible exchange rate regime that the government sets upper band and lower band within which the depreciation or appreciation must float. Right. Now, when the exchange rate goes beyond either the upper or the lower, the central bank is expected to intervene. As we speak, we do not know specifically what the government has set as the upper band or the lower band. We don't know. But what we know is that of the ECOWAS, and Ghana is a member of the ECOWAS. So if you are taking the ECOWAS convergence criteria as an example, then we are talking about some minus 10% depreciation and plus 10% appreciation. So anything beyond this will call for intervention. Now, the central bank's capacity to intervene in the forex market depends on the accumulated reserves. And as you are all aware, the central bank is in a very good position to intervene. They have built reserves, current reserves about $12 billion. Gold reserves is around 38 tons. By the way, we always propose that the reserves is not enough, the gold reserves, because our peers like Mexico and Kazakhstan, the three countries, Ghana, Mexico, Kazakhstan, we produce similar gold in terms of tons. So they have a reserves of 125. And we are having 38. So there's a call for us to deepen our reserves. But we are still building as a country, we are building the reserves. And so the capacity to intervene depends on the reserves, both in dollar terms and also in gold terms. In recent times, the Bank of Ghana has been criticized for its heavy intervention, for which many pundits believe that the exchange rate is artificial. So the BOJ responded and said that they are not doing intervention, they are doing intermediation. But CPS believes that both in practice and theory, financial intermediation is done by financial intermediaries. The central bank is not a financial intermediary. It is a regulator. So it should be done by, commercial banks and other secondary and primary dealers. But the point is that gold proceeds, cocoa proceeds, and other proceeds from our exports directly go to the central bank. For example, Cocoa Board would purchase cocoa, sell it, and all the dollars will not be kept with the commercial banks. They will be kept with the central bank. So it is within this remit that we agree for any possible intervention from the central bank, because the central bank is more or less has a full custody of the proceeds from our exports. But the bone of contention is not about the action, it's about the term, the concept that you are referring to. CPS will have no problem if the central bank intervenes and they have the capacity to intervene. But when you call it intermediation and not intervention, that is where we have a challenge with the definition. The next topic on sterilization. To contain monetary expansion, we've seen that the Bank of Ghana has intensified in the past, their operations. In fact, this started way back in 2024. And year-on-year basis, they have sterilized about 62 billion Ghana cedis. In other words, 62 billion Ghana cedis has been taken out of the system. This is to help, stabilize liquidity and maintain monetary discipline. For us to know the effect of sterilization or the importance of it, we have to compare the macro figures before, during, and after to see whether it was effective. And truly, the figures show that it was effective. But in 2026, if the government is intending to do any sterilization, it must be based on the main objectives and the policy direction of the government. While we don't believe that in 2026, when you want to expand, you do little sterilization, allow the credit to flow. So we must always have a debate on stability versus growth. Do you want stability or you want growth? If you want stability, then more sterilization. If you want growth, then less sterilization, so that you can ease credit to the private sector who will help you grow your economy and employ more people. Let's finish my session with physical and human capital. We know that in the year 2025, by mid-year, the CAPEX, capital expenditure, had been revised to 23.9 billion, representing only 9.5% of total expenditure. Clearly, in the year 2025, this CAPEX allocation is woefully inadequate. That's why we are not surprised to see a huge jump of CAPEX in 2026, to make up for the loss in 2025. In the year 2026, the budget total expenditure for the year is estimated at 302.5 billion Ghana cedis, an increase of 20.1% over the 2025 projected figures. Of this amount of 302.5 billion, 57.5 billion Ghana cedis, representing 19%, is allocated to capital expenditure, an increase of about 141% over the 2025 projections, and this is the public investment. The year 2026, the 2026 budget maintains this trajectory, positioning infrastructure as key driver for economic recovery and transformation. The budget also prioritizes certain projects. We all know the big push, a number of road projects, water, sanitation, digitization, housing. We also know the commitment of the government in the year 2026 of about 101 million Ghana cedis to the 24-hour economy to support productivity, focus shift across key sectors. The current allocations signal the capital investment backed by diversified financing through domestic revenue and external support, public-private partnership. This reinforces the government's focus on infrastructure as a catalyst for economic transformation. CPS has also noticed that about 14 of the key listed infrastructure projects are ongoing. This is a signal that the government is sending that they're not going to really start new projects, which is something good. They're going to continue with the existing projects. Some of the projects date as far back as 2024. So 14 of them were started in 2024, has been continuing in 2025, and will be continued in 2026. I think it's something that we should commend the government for doing. You see the ongoing projects a bit higher than the new projects, and most of the new and ongoing projects are in the road and highway, followed by works in housing, then sanitation and water, and then railway development, digital infrastructure, sports, recreation, energy, etc., etc. In terms of human capital development, here the focus is on education and health, and also some skills development. Again, most of the projects are ongoing, which is good. Only a few new, and most of the projects within the human capital are going to education, with a huge jump, health, youth development, and then social protection. So education seems to be at the center of this human capital development, and rightly so. The allocations to education and health. We've seen the total government of Ghana allocations of about 33.8 billion to education and 16.6 billion to health. Also, this shows that education and health continue to receive strong emphasis by the government. So many things going on in education. We know of the free SHS, and in recent times they've added the no academic fee policy, which is in place. The teacher training allowances are still there, distribution of textbook, capitation grants, school feeding programs, digital learning tools, and the free sanitary and pad initiatives are all ongoing. The government has also committed to upgrading TVET institutions and training new target skills in digital services. In health, a lot is going. We know the Mahama Care, we know of the NHIS. The NHI, we are advocating an automatic transfer. First, they started with the uncapping, and now we are preaching automatic transfer. What is automatic transfer? So when you buy any good, you buy a bottle of water, you pay NHIL first. It has to go through the central government before, the government will decide to, or even on how much to give to NHIA. But we are advocating for automatic 100% transfer. If somebody buys mobile phone and the person pays 2 cedis, it must go directly to NHIL 2 cedis. No delay and no reduction, so that we can have, an improved health care system. In terms of feasibility, it looks like all the expenditure items are quite feasible because the government did not commit so much to new projects. They're trying to, continue with the existing projects. But this idea of increasing CAPEX by 141% really raises questions about how feasible we're going to get the money to finance the infrastructure projects. But apart from that, the big push, all commitments look quite feasible. We have institutional readiness to also do that. The human capital elements, free SHS, no academic fee, policy, TVET, investment, they are all okay, they look feasible. And also the political support. I think so far so good. The Minister for Finance and the Ministry and the Central Bank, they have enjoyed political support from the executive, which is something we hope it continues. I think the only skepticism here is the 141 increment in CAPEX. On the back of revenue mobilization, when you have, abolished the COVID-19 and VAT effective rate is being reduced from 21.9 to 20. So everything is based on our hope for compliance and using the digital space to raise revenue. So that's where we are a bit skeptical. We just hope that the government is able to do this. At this point, I will pause and I'll ask my colleague to come and continue. Let's welcome Dr. Prince Ajay to take us through economic growth and employment.
I think Dr. Sarkodie deserves some commendation. So let me begin by asking a very interesting question from a biblical perspective. What shall it profit a nation if it is able to attain high economic growth, implement big push policies, attain single-digit inflation, but yet is unable to create jobs? All right, so my emphasis is on employment generation and jobs. All right, so I'm going to look at the context of employment, job prospects from the 2026 budget. Please can you roll for me? Let me begin by anchoring my discussion this way. For us to understand employment generation, we need to understand the structure and the dynamics of the labor force. And if you look at the figure that you have on the screen, from 2022 through to the fourth quarter of 2024, we see that the labor force is increasing. Ghana's labor force is growing in size. But ladies and gentlemen, labor force growth is not an indication that automatically there are more jobs, because the labor force is made up of those who are employed and those who are unemployed. All right, so if you look at the figure there, the red legend represents in millions number of people who are unemployed. The light green represents in millions number of people who are employed, and the light blue represent those who are outside the labor force. And we see that over the past 3 years, there's a steady growth in the patterns of employment and unemployment. All right, so in each quarter, about 40 million people form the labor force, with almost about 85% of them being employed. There's an interesting twist in the last two quarters of 2024. We noticed that between quarter 3 and quarter 4, employment increased by 409,000. It means that 409,000 people were able to find jobs to do. Let's look at the distribution of these jobs. All right, so in this slide, I'm going to talk about the regional distribution of unemployment. I would also look at the gender distribution of employment, and then I'll look at the locational distribution of employment. All right, so if you look at the first diagram on top, we are looking at the share of employment across male and female, and we notice that over time, within the same period 2022 through to 2024, the number of females that are able to land jobs outweigh the number of men, albeit these jobs are precarious jobs. They are not as decent as it is, but we still count them as jobs. With regard to location, we notice that the employment growth rate in urban areas outweigh that of the rural areas. So we see more people in the urban areas employed relative to the rural areas. Now let's look at unemployment nationally. The average rate of unemployment in 2024 hovered around 13.1%. Now if you look at the regional balance, Greater Accra is top on the ladder with 16.9%, far above the national average. As a matter of fact, there are 4 regions whose unemployment rate exceeds the national average. Greater Accra on the log, followed by Central, Ashanti, and then Volta region. And interestingly, the Bono region appears to have the lowest rate of unemployment, 6.9% in the year 2024. We need to understand this so that we can dissect very well the job creation potentials of the budget. So let's look at the sectoral growth rate. I mean, if we are looking at employment generation, then we need to understand where are the jobs coming from. All right. So first of all, let's look at the growth rate of the various sectors. In Ghana, we classify our sectors into 3 broad areas: the agricultural sector, the industrial sector, and the services sector. My interest is in looking at 2025 and 2026. But even if you look at the period over 10 years, what we can see is that there's a steady growth for almost all the sectors. Nonetheless, in 2025, growth was mainly driven by the services sector, industrial sector recording in 2025, growth was driven largely by the service sector, that's 6.4%. And the key drivers behind this growth were the ICT and then the financial sector. All right, so those were the subsectors that propelled growth in the services sector. This was followed closely by industry with 4.5%. And the trigger of industrial growth came from the extractives, gold contributing a lot in this regard. If you look at agriculture appears to be lagging behind, but you will notice that in terms of the kind of skill sets and the type of labor that's required in the agricultural sector, they are not as specialized as those within the industry and then the services. Now let's look at the 2026 target. In 2026, we project that services will maintain its lead with 5.6%, although in terms of target, it is lower than the 2025 target. We expect agri to also grow to 4.2% and industry to follow by 4.5%. What we expect to be the trigger of this growth for agri is the cocoa sector. So we expect more investment, we expect to see more action in the cocoa subsector. For industry, we continue to rely on good growth and also improvement in the utilities, electricity, and water. All right, please move on. Move on, yes. All right, move on. Go to the table 5, metrics of manifesto track. All right, so in this section, what we seek to do is basically to track the manifesto promises that were made. Don't forget that a new government assumed power, and proud to win in power, a lot of things were said. And first budget was read, and the second budget has been read. It is important to see to it what they said they would do, what they have done, and what the prospects are. So we highlight some key manifesto promises that are employment related, and we track it on the basis of what was done in 2025 and what is to be done in 2026. So if you look at the 24-hour economy, for instance, in 2025, the policy design framework was established, a technical committee has been made, and some initial allocation had been earmarked, to regulate the activities of 24-hour economy. We have not actually seen the policy run in full flight. I think a few weeks ago, CPS even had a workshop on that. In terms of 2026, what the government seeks to do is to do a national rollout by scaling up on what has been done in the policy design and set up all the enabling infrastructure for its success. There are also issues of industrialization where the government seeks to establish 3 new factories in the government subsector, basically in Kumasi, in Takoradi, and in Cape Coast. And this is expected to create about 27,000 jobs when completed in 2026. As we can see, the big push infrastructure project is in full flight. So far in 2025, 63 billion Ghana cedis have been allocated and executed, and it is actionable, we can see. In the 2026 budget, 30 billion Ghana cedis have been earmarked to augment the allocation that was made, and this is expected to create about 490,000 jobs within the construction subsector. The government also made an audacious ambition of 1 million coders to create jobs in the digital space. The training framework has been set, it's been launched. It is expected that in 2026, a full-scale national training will be done, and expected that a lot of young people would also have chances to. So this is just a snapshot of some of the manifesto promises and the state of affairs. In the next slide, what we seek to do is to look at selected policies and then assess government's commitment. Because if you say you are going to do policy A, we are interested in how much budget allocation had been earmarked for policy A. So how much was allocated in 2025 and how much has been allocated for 2026. This will give us a picture of continuity and a picture of credibility, and then also a picture of feasibility. All right, so we selected a few policies which are social in nature, cutting across youth, cutting across women, etc. Let me mention that some of these policies were policies in the old regime, like the school feeding program, the LEAP, the National Youth Authority. These were programs that were run by the erstwhile government, which has been continued and sustained. And so if you look at the blue legend explains the 2026 allocation, and the the pink legend explains the 2025 allocation. Where you see only blue legend, it tells you that no allocation was made in 2025. So perchance, it was just, the design and the framework being established in 2025. An example is the Nkukon Kitinkiti program. In the 2025 budget, though mentioned no allocation was made, but in this 2026 budget, an allocation had been made. Women and Youth in Aquaculture, Feed Ghana program, the 24-hour economy, all these policies did not receive allocation in the 2025 budget, but have space within the 2026 budget. If you look at a program like Ejumaria and the CODES program and the Digital Youth Hub, some allocation was made in 2025, but we see enhanced allocation in 2026, giving us an idea of how serious the government is in actualizing these policies. So let's analyze the feasibility of the flagship programs. How do we assess the feasibility? We assess the feasibility in terms of actual budget allocations and then implementation, timelines or actions. And so we highlight a few of these flagship policies and appoint a 3 rating scale: low, medium, and high. So if a program is rated high, it means that there's an allocation for that program and actionable, decisions or steps have been taken. If a program is rated medium, it means that, some allocation has been made, but in terms of actionable steps, not much has been done. And if it is rated low, then it means that allocation, either has not, or in terms of what has been allocated, looking at the target, it is woefully inadequate. On the basis of this scenario, we make the case that the big push infrastructure is highly feasible because allocations have been made, there have been executions, and procurement and contract issues have also been ratified, and we can see the evidence on ground. The garment and textile factories, initially, some initial projects have been done, and we rate that also to be high. The same applies to rural electrification. We rate it to be highly feasible, subject to the fact that budget allocations will be released. However, if we look at the agro-processing and the 24-hour economy, we rate them medium because in terms of what the government said it will do and how much it has been allocated, we think that it is woefully inadequate. And so we are not saying it is not doable, but in terms of the feasibility by our timelines, more needs to be done. The digital job is ranked low because the ambition is to pump about $3 billion into this. But so far, only about 300 million cedis have been pushed into that sector, which is woefully inadequate. And for that matter, we believe that these are goals, these are ambitions, but the success of this depends on actual releases and then commitment on the part of the government. Let's go back to the question that I posed. What shall it profit a country to enjoy high growth but unable to create jobs? Jobs do not just come from the sky. You need a macro environment that is stable. All right. So in examining the macro environment, we look at some key monetary variables. All right. Don't forget that the government agenda is to leverage on private sector growth and private sector involvement. And so the strength of the private sector is critical to job creation. And how the monetary variables work impact on the private sector. Okay, so we look at some monetary variables like the interest rate, credit availability, liquidity constraints, banking sector strength, and then open market, i.e. the treasury bill. Overall, what we see is that the monetary variables look good. They appear favorable to private men. the crowding out effect has been constrained a bit, and so firms or private firms cannot access the credit market. These are indications that there are better days for the private sector. We see that policy rate has reduced. Forex, the exchange rate has stabilized in recent times, and notably, non-performing loan ratio has reduced, which means that banks now have the space and the confidence to give out more loans to private people. And this can potentially trigger more jobs within the private sector. So what are our conclusions and observations? On the basis of what my colleague presented and on the basis of what I have presented, we draw the conclusion that the objective of the 2026 budget is to stimulate the economy by loosening up, fiscal and monetary policy to create the environment for jobs. Don't forget that the objective of the 2026 budget is threefold: to pursue growth, infrastructure development, and job creation. The success, however, in our view, depends on how the government is able to mobilize revenue, how it is able to ensure prudence in its spending, how it is able to ensure that there is effective monitoring and evaluation, and how it is able to create a needed environment for the private sector, to play its role. We therefore recommend that to make the 2026 targets actionable, government should increase resources to GRA, who is the chief tax collector, to ensure that they get the needed support to plug in all the loopholes and all the leakages and raking more money. Don't forget that the ambitious capex of 141% is largely dependent on how much revenue comes in. We also advocate that there should be a scaling up of spending in the 2026 budget, but this should not be at the expense of efficiency. Normally, we notice that when governments have these ambitious budgets, in order to impress, they overspend and they become reckless. We are advocating that the government should be careful and ensure discipline in this regard. We also make the case that the government should be more innovative in striking a balance between stability and growth. You will notice that when we're observing the sectoral contributions, we made a case that the service sector, appears to jump the lead. This means that to sustain the gains in the service sector, we need more investment in human capital development, because this sector is skill-driven and specialized skills are needed in those sectors. So we advocate that the government should improve human capital development. In conclusion, we say that dreams are good, goals are exciting, ambitions are good, but the government must create a balance between ambition and credibility. For us to have faith in the government that they can do what they want to do, there must be timely release of budgeted allocations. There must be discipline in terms of spending, and above all, they should give us hope for the future. Thank you for indulging us.
Please, can we give our two presenters another round of applause? I think they've done extremely well in breaking down the budgets and helping us to all understand what it means for us in our future as a country. Thank you, Dr. Eduo Usisa-Kodie and Dr. Prince Ejay. So now we'll move on to some questions from the audience. So if you'd like to ask a question, kindly put your hand up. The microphone will come around, and then you can proceed to ask your question. So we'll take about 3 questions, and then our panel will respond, and then we'll come back again for another set. We will do this in the next 10 minutes, and then after that, we'll also take some reflections. So if you have comments, you may want to just wait till the reflections time, and then you pass your comments. But for now, we want to take some questions. So someone already has the microphone, so please let's hear you.
Okay. Good morning. And then thanks to our presenters for giving an insightful presentation regarding the budget. I would like us to, I'll come to my question, but I want to, one of the key things or some of the key things that we look at when a budget is being presented is one, its ability to create an atmosphere of conviviality to ease pressures on households, and then also job creation, making sure that sustainable jobs are created to reduce the unemployment rate. Now, if you look at the 2026 budget, paragraph 1182, the budget says that at the end of it all, it's going to create about 800,000 jobs. Now, that is about 63 billion, also 63 billion road contracts awarded so far under the big push. And then on paragraph 1185, the three garment factories will create over 20,000 direct jobs. Paragraph 1186, the 7 agro-processing plants will employ about 700 people directly and thousands more through supply chains. Paragraph 1187, the national policy on integrated oil palm development will create 250,000 jobs across the value chain. Now, if you look at all these projections, for me, if you look at all these projections, all these jobs, there is a question mark when it comes to these projections that government has made regarding job creation, because these jobs are not sustainable enough. If you look at the big push, for instance, and the job that has been allocated under it, you realize that majority of these job creation are constructional kind of, which at the end of the day face off after the project. Now my question to Doug, because you looked about the job creation kind of, and I need a very objective view. Do you think, because in the recommendation section I saw that the budget was kind of I don't know, but I saw kind of enabling job creation kind of, which I disagree, because if you look at all these jobs that have been created, do you think that government should rather invest in capital areas that create sustainable jobs rather than looking at areas that give some kind of short-term job opportunities, that in the end we come back to square one? That is the question that I want to ask.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we'll take 2 additional questions. The female, please. We've had 1 male, so 1 female, and then we'll come back to you. She's behind you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ramat. I work with Multimedia, precisely Joy News. During the presentation, much attention was not given to the food glut issue that the finance minister mentioned, that the president is directing that all schools henceforth purchase local foods, chicken, rice, and maize. Now, my question is, from your analysis or from your review, do you think that we can meet the demand if this directive is strictly to be obeyed? Do you think we can meet the demand? The local producers can meet the demand? Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we'll take 1 more, then our panelists will respond. Okay, we have 1 here.
Okay, thank you. Please, my name is Emmanuel. I work with CTFM. So I'm just seeking clarification.
Okay.
During Professor Edusa Kodia's presentation, I think he mentioned monetary policy is to 15%. I want you to confirm for me. And what factors would drive this 15%? And my next confirmation or seeking clarification has to do with Professor AJ. You did mention the CD is stable. I don't know whether there's an assertion that it has appreciated, but it's still not stable. So even for instance, this morning, even on the interbank rate, it's gone up a bit. So whether it's an appreciation we are seeing or a stability on the back that businesses want a stable currency. Then with the selected projects that you highlighted, I didn't really see anything on the Women's Bank. If it's there, please correct that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, thank you. So would move to our panel if they are ready.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll take the first question.
Is this one on? Hello? Okay. My colleague will start, but just to clarify that we are not professors yet. We don't want Jane Tech to come after us. So, praise.
Yes, you just, if you press on it.
It's on now.
Yes.
It should be on.
Hello.
Okay, use this one.
Hello? Okay. All right, thank you very much. So, your question is about where should government invest in terms of getting sustainable jobs? Right, so with the 800,000 job prospects, when we did a breakdown, we noticed that, for instance, the big push and then the infrastructure is basically temporary jobs. So about 88% of those jobs are temporary. And then 12% are permanent jobs. When you take the oil palm industrialization and agro-processing policy, it is expected to create about 150,000 permanent jobs and 100,000 temporary jobs. And then for the government sector, we expect that all jobs in that sector would be permanent. Now, in analyzing job quality, we usually talk about vulnerable jobs and decent jobs, or decent and indecent jobs. The argument is this. Half a loaf is better than none. All right. So rather than staying idle and not getting anything to do, at least if you have something doing, it is better. The objective of each one of us is to get stable, decent job that is good paying. But don't forget that these job estimates are project-based estimates. So they vary with the nature of the project. All right. So we will advise that as the service sector, from the sectorial growth that I showed, is leading the pack in terms of growth. And this growth triggered by innovations in ICT and financial sector. More training should be done for youth within those areas for digital skills so they can get sustainable jobs. Again, you notice that even though employment in the agri sector seems to lag behind, like I said, employment in the agri sector are not really skill intensive. So if government is able to also push more investment there, we can have a lot of people in that sector who may get some very decent jobs to do. So these are my arguments for now. Another question was posed to me about the CD appreciation, whether it is stability or appreciation. Well, in Dr. Sachs' presentation, he made a case that usually there's a band that will place -10 plus 10. If we should do an introspection from where this new government took off, and as we have now, we could say that there have been some fair stability. As to whether it is organic or inorganic is a discussion for another day. But the argument is that it has created some level of stability for investors. You also mentioned about the Women's Bank. I think I featured it in the list of projects. I don't know it was captured in there. So some allocation had been made for 2026. Thank you very much.
All right.
All right, thank you. Let me a quick run on the job creation. It's important to create long-term sustainable jobs. That's what we all crave for. But whilst we are waiting to create that long-term sustainable jobs, it's not out of place to offer short-term ones, to provide short-term relief, whilst the economy is being transformed to create sustainable ones. So a mixture is helpful, all right? Because maybe it will take like 5 years to get a more sustainable jobs, but in the meantime, we should provide some short-term measures and not to waste money on the short term, but more on the long term. That the discussion on job creation strikes me. It reminds me of my conversation with a friend who says that he traveled to the Volta region in the northern part of the country, and he has seen the migration of foreigners into the country, and these are doing more of agricultural things, painting, carpentry, POP, graffiato. Now, you ask most of our Ghanaian landowners who are building houses, they prefer to use Togolese POP and graffiato and painting. What is the issue? So the job creation is, I mean, there's so many factors that account for it. Because whilst you are trying to open up the economy and create jobs, it looks like our own Ghanaians are not interested, or for some reason, they're not getting those jobs, and Togolese are getting the POP, the graffiato. So the conversation of job creation should not be limited to one, white-collar jobs. If you are a painter, so the way people see job as, you know, I'm wearing a tie, that means I'm employed. But if for a painter, POT, graffiato, whatever, it's still a job. So we have to maybe reorient our people the way they are shying away from certain jobs, and foreigners are rather seeing the opportunities. And so the conversation should be a bit broader. On the issue of stability of our appreciation, I think my colleague touched on it. And CPS, we preach stability, and every businessman and woman prefers stability. What is stability? Stability is when you can project, you can plan around it. You can plan around that the city is going to be, say, around 10 to 12 cities to $1 in the next 1 year, 6 months, or 2 years. It's more preferred to this up jump, down jump, that sharp curve. The sharp curve is not preferable. The stability, so that you can predict, is more preferable. On the issue of food, that they should purchase from local or locally produced items, of course. I mean, this policy achieves two objectives. First, we create market for the local production, and second, we want to create, the government wants to develop appetite, you know, for our locally produced items, right from the high school or the JSS. So you develop appetite for local rice, for local oil, and so that when you grow with it, you'll not be tempted to buy more foreign ones. Now, I think your specific question was about, would they be able to meet the demand? Recently, I saw in the news that the farmers were rather crying that there's no demand for their produce. So I think they have the capacity. You know, let me put it in simple terms. Our local producers have the capacity to produce to meet the demand by the school authorities, being high school or junior school students. If we are not able to meet the demand, maybe a small supplement from importation wouldn't kill, but basically maybe 80% should be from local production, and we can grow with that. Yeah, the confirmation of MPR less than 15%, yes. This is not a statement by the central government, central bank. It's a statement by us based on projections. We looked at inflation rate. And so history is telling us that anytime inflation is within single digit, we see the monetary policy rate falling between 10 and 15. So it's based on history. It's not based on any central bank projection. It's based on our history, you know, which we have learned. And if it's around, and all indications point to a downward trend of the MPR, you know, and I'm sure if it's around 10 to 15, it should be okay for us with the way we have managed the exchange rate and the inflation as a country. I think that should be it.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. So we'll take 2 additional questions, one from here and then one from the back. Oh, you want to ask? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Another one. Okay, let's
let's hear from the others. We'll come back to you. So please go ahead.
Okay,
please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
My name is Mohammed Abubakari. I'm a PhD student at the University of Ghana Economics Department.
Yes, you're asking your lecturer's question. You will meet you in the classroom.
Okay, so seniors, thank you for enlightening us. I'll start from where you ended. The inflation rates have been coming down and all that, and I can see that government targets deficit financing. I think they are targeting more of local sources, domestic sources. Would that not be a panacea to crowd out private investment because banks naturally prefer to lend to governments than private investors? Reason because looking at the job creation matrix Dr. Prince gave, if you look at the sustainable jobs, historically it's been found in the industry, especially manufacturing. But the manufacturing figures seem to be quite low with what he gave. And we've seen a shift. Traditionally, we were made to believe that from agric we enter industry before we go to service. And all of a sudden, service have taken over and manufacturing seems to be lagging. What have we done over the years with our budgets that's contributing to that?
Okay, thank you. So we'll take one more and then the last one. Then our panel will respond. But in the interest of time, we are going to merge the reflections and the questions. So we'll take another set of 3, we'll come back, then another set of 3, then we end the session. Okay, so please introduce yourself.
Thank you to the 2 docs. My name is Cliff Ekofu. I write for the Ghanaian Times. Very inspiring and making the budget easy to understand. Interestingly, in the presentation, I realized that nothing was said about the DDEP. Given that has given us some reprieve in terms of our fiscal space, and the fact that next year we are moving back to commitment, I would want to find out if that has been factored into the overall government expenditure and how that is going to impact the fiscal space once we begin to honor our commitments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll take the question from the back. Sorry, his hand was up first. So then we'll come to you in the next round.
Yes, good morning. My name is Manasseh Atabuahene. I'm also a PhD candidate, so I'm happy to sit back and listen to the wonderful presentations from my lecturers. I was just wondering, the underperformance of our revenue targets for 2025, has been very worrying. And I don't know the implications of this, onto the wonderful figures we've heard the finance minister mention. Whether we like it or yes, it will affect budget credibility. And that explains why, a lot of the expenditure commitments were not met. Because you see, in 2025, a lot of contractors were not paid and a lot of allocations were not done. Of course, we all heard of the 51 million Ghana cedi allocation for the Women's Development Bank. No allocation was made. And so I will be grateful if our lecturers will be able to, point to us what went wrong. Why was it that, all these revenues the government projected to raise, were not achieved, so that maybe we'll be able to learn some lessons from this. Thank you.
Thank you. So today they are not lecturers.
Yeah.
They are CPS.
CPS.
They are CPS team members. So, okay, we'll take one more and then our panel will respond. Please go ahead.
My name is Ebenezer Kofi Amponsah with the Daily Guide. Mine has to do with the forex. Now, in your conclusion remarks, you did mention that if government is going to more or less be able to achieve all these programs and its policies, then it has to do a lot of prudent management, fiscal discipline. But I'm asking, given the situation where in October this year, government has to pump in some money into the forest, about $1.1 billion for forest intervention, is in a way going to put them off gear vis-a-vis if they are not able to mobilize enough. GRA and other institutions are not able to make enough mobilization of revenue. It's not going to put them off gear in terms of achieving macro stability.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So I think we got about 5 questions in all.
Yeah.
So one person can take 3, the other will take 2.
Okay, so let me start. Deficit financing, borrowing from the domestic market, wouldn't it crowd out? First, it depends on how much the government is borrowing. And I agree with you. I mean, for the beginning of the year, the government has been doing more of, in fact, since 2022, they've been doing more of domestic financing and also concessionary borrowing. So first, it depends on the quantity. And second, they should complement the domestic with external borrowing, concessionary ones, not the most expensive ones. They can do more concessionary, and they leave part of the domestic for the private sector to also borrow. The issue of agri to industry and services, my colleague will answer that, but let me touch on this. Since 2007, we have seen this transformation, the change of agri. Agri is losing its share of employment and GDP since 2007, when the government decided to invest more in health and education. That's how come services sector has overtaken that. In terms of economic trajectory, it is not too much of a problem when agri is losing the employment, but to where? If agri loses its employment or its share to employment and GDP, it is not a problem. It counts with the economic transformation trajectory. Now, Ghana's problem is that agri is losing it not to manufacturing, but it is losing it to the services. That is where the issue is. And this is because of migration. You and I, our friends and family, will migrate from the rural areas, come to the cities in search for manufacturing jobs. They don't find, they end up selling pure water on the streets. That is the challenge, you know. So I think Prince can throw more light on that. And the DDEP. Now, thanks for bringing it. And I have made this point elsewhere. And CPS, we believe that major credit must be given to the bondholders who sacrificed, who endured painful haircuts and sacrificed. That paved the way for the IMF program. The gains, the results is what we see now. If Ghana was not successful with their debt exchange, we would not have gotten the IMF program. And if we had not gotten the IMF program, we would not be where we are now talking about the gains we have made as a country. So kudos to all the bondholders. It was painful, but it was necessary. And then they accepted to do that for us. And now you are going back to them to raise long-term bonds. And so there's some kind of, I don't know how the government is going to convince them. Well, the best way to convince investors is higher price, higher interest. So maybe if they don't calculate their things where they may end up raising the long-term domestic bonds at a higher rate because of the DDEP. Or maybe Ghanaians will be forgiven to accept a lower rate. The issue of, yes, the revenue deviation. The revenue deviation. Yeah, my brother. So I think in my submission, I was able to indicate that we've been missing the revenue targets over the period. So it's more like a feature of Ghana. The ideal deviation is -3 + 6. But if you trace our history over the past 10 years or more, it's only 3 years that we are falling within the ideal situation: 2015, 2018, and 2021. These are the only 3. Apart from these 3, in all our history tells us that we've been deviating more than the ideal situation. So a negative 4.7 is also outside the ideal situation. So what happened? In the 2025 budget, you saw abolishment of taxes. E-levy was giving the government, as at that time, 2.6 billion. 2.6 billion was taken out. I think the betting tax was around 300 million or so, was taken away. COVID-19, the projection was next year will be 3.2 billion. It's been taken away. Now, let me situate my answer into a proper context so that you get a picture. The royalties from gold, royalties from oil and gas, give us a similar amount as COVID-19. Royalties from oil and gas give us almost the same amount. As I wrote it somewhere, I'll get a figure for you. It's around 2.8, 2.9. And we have taken it out. Almost $3 billion, or next year, 3.2 billion. So that will bring your revenue performance down. The government is trying to tell us, communicate a story that by abolishing those taxes and by reducing the VAT from 21.9 to 20 effective rate, they expect compliance and the use of digital technology to collect revenue. So their hopes are on this, compliance. And you know that compliance takes time. So even the 2026 projections, we are afraid because compliance takes time to be effective. Hopefully, in the subsequent years, it will bring us more revenue. But with the abolishment of those taxes, the compliance, it will take some time. There's a time lag all the time. So I think, Prince, the forex, okay, let me finish with the forex and then you can take the jobs. The central bank's intervention, is it not going to affect the IMF program? I don't think so. The IMF has a target that we meet, a certain limit of intervention. The key issue here is the number of reserves we have built as a country. We have enough reserve. $12 billion dollar reserve, 38 tons gold reserve. Hopefully next year all these figures will be greater than what I've quoted. So the central bank has the capacity to intervene. So mostly IMF will look at the implications of your intervention. Is your intervention causing a depletion of the reserves? And in our current situation, no. It is not causing a depletion of the reserves. If anything at all, we are seeing a build-up of the reserves. In other words, the inflow is greater than the outflow. That is why, even though they are intervening, we are still building up because the inflows are getting bigger and bigger from price levels and for also the quantity of output from gold and cocoa. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So,
yes.
Dr. Prince, I think your microphone should be working.
Should be working now?
Yes.
Hello? All right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So, in our study, we try to interrogate why sectorally their performance have been quite unstable. And if you look at the data carefully, if you look at the 3 sectors post-COVID, the sector that has suffered most has been the industrial sector, of which the manufacturing subsector falls into. We notice a few things. Number one, energy shocks negatively impacts that sector. Number two, the issue of macro rigidities. You will notice that where there are inflation uncertainties, high interest rates, the issue of exchange rate uncertainty, these things have an impact on operations of these industries, and they tend also to suffer. We also notice that there is an emerging trend for digital jobs, and so especially a lot of young people prefer to shy away from these manufacturing, construction, quarrying jobs and move into the service sectors where now digital space, just with a mobile phone, you can sit somewhere and be employed. Like Dr. Sarkozy said, we notice that the shift from agric is not into the manufacturing, but a feeding into the services. So when you put all of this together, it has tended to deepen the woes of the manufacturing sector. And that is why we made a case that if the macro variables or the macro environment is solid and the private sector is empowered, they can complement public investment in job creation. I also want to make the point that now the nature of jobs are changing and we are in the skill economy, and so a lot of investment in artisanal skills, in digital skills is now becoming the order of the day. And so traditional manufacturing firms are even changing the way they work now. Most manufacturing jobs are not becoming labor intensive now, employing very sophisticated machines to do the work. So there is some displacement effect that is also taking place, and that is crippling the growth of labor in those sectors. I think for the other questions, Dr. Sarkozy has mentioned, but let me just talk a little about mixed revenue target. It is again this backdrop that we make the recommendation that the government should channel more effort in strengthening GRA, because a lot of these ambitions and this project the government wants to do is contingent on earmark revenue. And now that the government do not want to go and borrow from the capital market, they are doing what you call smart borrowing, trying to explore all the leakages within the system. And so if GRA is empowered and we have efficient monitoring evaluation strategies in place, we are of the view that they can shore up their revenue target. It's also important to note that fiscal discipline is key. Next year we are going to the World Cup. We do not want to hear a case where there have been unbudgeted outlays because we need to appease people. So, like I said, the ambitions are good, but government's credibility is on the line. The reason why we are all concerned is because over the years, budgets are read, targets are mentioned, and we miss them. And so there is policy incredibility. And if there's anything that we can advise the government, their credibility is at stake. And they need to ensure that targets that they have set, even if they are deviating, the rate of deviation should not be that high. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prince Ajay. So it's currently 12 p.m. I know I said I'll come back for some more questions, but we would have to wrap up in the interest of time. So for me, my reflection, I actually had a couple of questions jotted down, but I realized that these questions were very, very similar to what everybody asked. And for me, that shows that as Ghanaians, we are all interested in the same things, and we all want Ghana to grow and get to a certain level where we are thriving. There are more jobs, there are more investments, etc. So on behalf of the board and management of CPS, I would like to thank you all for making the time to join us here today. Please note that the conversation for CPS does not end here. We also do engage in further activities after today's forum, such as the youth dialogue. So we visit some universities and we engage students and young people on what their thoughts are. And in this case, it will be on the budget. So please watch out for that. You can get a full copy of the analysis on our website, www.cpsghana.com. We would also share with you via mail and at the registration desk. I'm sure you left your details there. You could also follow us on our social media platforms, Facebook, X and Instagram, CPS_Ghana. And also note that this presentation was live streamed on YouTube at CPS Today Ghana. So if you want to go back and have a look at the video, you can do that on YouTube as well. And we want to thank our online audience as well for joining us. And thank you all once again. So shall we pray to end the session? Our Lord and Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for a successful session. We thank you for bringing us all here safely. We ask that as we go about the rest of your day, you continue to guide and protect us. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you all for coming. Please note that there's some refreshment outside for